Good evening. Welcome everyone joining us today. This is the fourth of the artist-led talks organized by the Yunus Emre Institute of London and the Leighton House. We explore the arts and crafts of Turkey. Today, our special guest is Ayesha Gamiet. She's a classically trained illuminator, illustrator, and educator. She's someone who's been trained both theoretically and practically in the field of Islamic art. She studied at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, at the Princess School of Traditional Arts, and also University of Cambridge. She's undoubtedly a very skilled artist, but I would like to say that she's also a very special personality. I hope you will receive a part of her shine today. It's a pleasure for me to welcome her on this platform. We have two parts of this Zoom talk. In the first part, Ayesha will present her work. We will have a few short breaks in which I might forward your questions to her. The second part will be the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please do share with us. Welcome, Ayesha.
Thank you. Thank you, Zainab, and thank you very much to Leighton House Museum and to the Yunus Emre Institute for inviting me. I'm really, really honoured to be here. Last week when Zainab and I were planning this talk and thinking about how to present things, I was telling her a little bit about what I wanted to talk about. And she said to me, "That sounds great, Ayesha, but don't make it all about illumination and the craft of illumination. Tell us something about yourself as well." So I'm very, I'm very used to talking about illumination because I've taught it for quite some time and been involved in it for 12 years or more. And so I'd like to begin by talking a bit about my own personal background. I was born in the UK and brought up in the UK as well, but my parents are of South African heritage. They immigrated to the UK in the 1970s, really to escape apartheid and the unjust apartheid government that they were living under. We are a Muslim family, and we have quite an interesting ethnic mix because although all of our family is from South Africa, we're a kind of a mix of Asian and European and African ethnicity as well. And I think it's important to mention that at the beginning because it informs probably quite a lot of the decisions that I've made in life and my creative path as well. I was drawn to study, when it came to choose my degree, I was drawn to study a degree in History of Art and Archaeology at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And I think that it was partly due to having all of those cultural influences in my upbringing that I always had this love of learning about other cultures and this love for art as well. So I thought history of art and archaeology of Africa and Asia would be absolutely fascinating. And it was a very, very interesting time. And it was also a completely theoretical degree. So it was all art history. There was no practical aspect. And it gave me a very good theoretical and historical foundation in Islamic art. But there was something that was missing through all of this. We were taught Islamic art as though it was something that arose out of the meeting of the Byzantine civilizations and the Persian civilizations and the Roman civilizations. And it was in a very historical way. But being someone who is quite creative, I didn't feel that was the entire answer. I always felt that there was something else as well. There must be something else, to make Islamic art the way that it is, because it does look very different from Byzantine and Roman and Persian art. And I think what I was getting at was that there was no real teaching of the underlying philosophy and spirituality that underpins the essence of Islamic art, and I was missing that. But I think in those early days, I wouldn't have even had the vocabulary to express that. I just felt intuitively that something was missing. So I'm going to just start my presentation now. If you bear with me for a second.
Yeah, very excited to listen.
So as I was, when I was a student at SOAS, my sister was studying at Royal Holloway University, and she was doing a degree in history and Spanish, and she spent some time in Granada. And I really feel that my trip to Granada to visit my sister is really the beginning of my story. So let's just show you a few images of where I went to in Granada. So this is the Alhambra Palace in Granada. And I was in my early 20s doing my undergraduate degree, and it was my first encounter with Islamic art on such a grand scale. And I think it's significant that it was architecture as well, because my parents had taken me to mosques and I'd been to museums and I'd seen Islamic art in various, museums. But the immersion in architecture is really something very special, because it's so sensory. It's not just the visual that we're attracted to, but there's the smell of the orange blossoms and the jasmine, and you can hear the trickling of the water in the fountains, and look at the beautiful textures of the mosaics and the carvings. So it was just really very, very overwhelming and very, very powerful for me. And I was just completely, it was breathtaking. It was very, very inspiring. And I remember standing in one of these courtyards in the Alhambra and making a little prayer. And it was that, I just wanted to be able to make something which was maybe just had a fraction of the beauty of what I was seeing around me. And I felt that if I could do that, I would really love to share that beauty with the world. And I think that this is an important thing to mention now as well, because reflecting back and putting this presentation together, that was a huge turning point for me. It's as though everything that unfolded from that moment on was really an answer to that prayer. And that's really the journey that I'd like to share with you today. So moving on. So these are a few more images of the beautiful Alhambra, which I highly recommend visiting if you've never been there before. But returning back to the UK after my first trip to Spain, I had to return back to my degree, and something had changed at that point. I wasn't really happy in it, but I had to finish it. I wanted to learn the practice of Islamic art, but I had no idea where I could do that. So I was a little bit stuck. And by chance, one day, I went to a lecture on Islamic calligraphy. In fact, it was a whole day of lectures, but I missed everything except the last one. And by sheer coincidence, the person giving the lecture was Soraya Saeed, who is also somebody who's been invited on the Artists in Conversation series, and she gives a beautiful talk. You should all go and watch that after this. So Soraya is a very highly regarded calligrapher who trained in Istanbul under classical masters, and she was the first person I met who practiced Islamic art as an art form, and did not just know about the theory and the history of it. So after the talk, I went and I spoke to her, and she mentioned this place called the Prince's School of Traditional Arts, which in those days it was called VITA, the Visual Islamic and Traditional Arts Program, based in Shoreditch in East London. And so she suggested that I apply for that, and so I did, and I got a place to do a master's. So for those of you who don't know, the Prince's School is a postgraduate institution in the east of London, and it's set up by the founder is the Prince of Wales, the patron, and he set it up to encourage the practice and the teaching of traditional arts and crafts of the world, which are sadly dying out if we don't practice them anymore. So at the Prince's School, I met many inspiring teachers and many inspiring people. But the two that I'd like to focus on in this talk are Keith Critchlow, who is in the picture on the left, and Paul Marchant, who is in the picture on the right, wearing the white hat. So Keith was the director of the school, and he sadly passed away earlier this year. And he was a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring person, a real master of Islamic geometry. I don't know if there is anyone who, I think he was really at the top of his game, and he was really a very inspiring person. But what I learned from Keith was, it wasn't, I mean, not just in terms of geometry, but just in terms of the type of person he was. He was always inclusive, and he always made people feel welcome, even though he was so high up in his field. You know, he would come and speak to all of the students, and you know, I remember him coming over to talk to me as well, who was just very young and knew nothing at all. But he always made a point of making people feel welcome, and it's something that I really, really appreciated at the time, because I think I had very, very bad imposter syndrome when I was a student there. I didn't really feel that I was good enough to be there, but Keith always made me feel like that was where I belonged, and I really, really appreciate him for that. The second person I want to talk about is Paul Marchant. Paul was compassion in teaching. And I'm talking about this because you'll see throughout my talk that the student-teacher relationship is a recurring theme, and so is the theme of education and how to be a good teacher, and how to cultivate creativity in my students. But Paul was is a very compassionate teacher, and there is one little anecdote I'd like to share with you, which is when I once had a tutorial, and I was not happy with my work, and not really feeling that my work was as good as all the other students, because I had come from an art history background. Most of the other students had degrees or masters, or a lot of professional experience in the arts. So I felt that I was really not as good as them. And I remember Paul realizing that, and the next day I came to my desk, and he left a hyacinth on my desk for me, and it hadn't opened. It was just the bud. And I want you to keep that on your desk and watch it grow every day, and make a drawing of it. And once it's grown, the scent of the hyacinth stimulates creativity. And it was just I was so touched. It was such a kind thing to do, because I think if he had addressed with me directly how I was feeling about not really feeling good enough, I would have been quite embarrassed. I would have been really embarrassed. But he was sensitive enough to know that I just needed a little bit of kindness. And that taught me a huge amount about teaching and about education, and sort of nurturing and bringing out the best in your students. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's a very beautiful insight, Ayesha. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No, it's a pleasure. But I must also just mention Emma Clark and Jonathan and Simon and Khalid and all the other teachers who just made that place so special. You know, we tried everything. We did Persian and Indian miniature painting, Arabic calligraphy, Western calligraphy, ceramics, marquetry. We had geometry all the way through. And it was honestly the most magical and inspiring period of my life, because it was exactly what I was looking for in the Alhambra.
Likewise.
I think many students would agree, I'm sure. So moving on, just a quick look at some of the works I made at the Princess School. I don't unfortunately have everything, because I had a bit of a computer crash a few years ago and I lost a lot of my old photos, but here are a few. So we had field trips while we were at the Princess School. One I returned to the Alhambra, and that was in the first year. So we had a field trip to the Alhambra, and the second one was to Cairo. And they were just fantastic, because we would visit all of these historical Islamic monuments, and Paul would sit in these monuments with us, teaching us geometry on site. I mean, I just feel so honored to have had that experience with him. The image on the left and in the center is the ceiling of the Sultan Barkuk Mosque in Cairo, which is just breathtakingly beautiful. I remember looking up at that and feeling as though I was looking up into the heavens. And so one of the pieces I did at the Princess School is an illumination inspired by that ceiling, which is what you see on the right. Now these are my Indian and Persian miniature paintings, which I also did at the Princess School. So we had a week-long course in Indian miniature and a week-long course in Persian miniature. And the Indian miniature is on the left and the Persian miniature is on the right. Now these are by no means perfect. In fact, they were my first ever attempts at miniature painting. They're not fantastic examples of the craft at all. But I'm showing them to you because because of what I learned through them. And the important thing I learned through them was that I have this ability to paint very fine and very detailed. And I have always been able to do that. And I just thought that everyone could do it. I never thought it was anything special. But I remember when making these, and the students and the tutors at the Princess School kept saying to me, wow, you have very, very good brushwork. You know, your brushwork is really, really good. Maybe you should try illumination. And that was really like the first inkling that maybe illumination was for me. I loved miniature painting as well, actually, and I was kind of deciding which one to specialize in. But I really, really loved doing the patterns on the clothing and the flowers and the trees, and most of illumination is plant and flower forms. So I thought, well, maybe this will suit me. And people kept telling me that maybe I should spend some time in Istanbul and try doing illumination, try and find a teacher out there. So introduce you to my teacher, and you know, we can see how things go. So that's what I did. And before moving on to the next section, which is the Illuminator's Apprentice. I thought maybe we could stop for a few questions if there are any, or if not, I can just carry on talking.
There aren't any questions, and I don't want to interrupt you in the beginning.
Sure.
Maybe in the next break we can, talk about if there's any question, or I might ask you some questions because we are limited in time.
Sure, of course, yeah. So so my friend had offered to introduce me to her teacher in Istanbul. I booked my tickets, and the plan was for us to go together. But unfortunately, she couldn't get a visa because she was a foreign student. And I had already booked my flights by then. So I ended up going to Istanbul alone. But I did have family friends from Istanbul who were able to bring me to my teacher and to help with some of the translation as well. So moving on to beautiful Istanbul. While I was there, I was completely overwhelmed by the kindness of people. I mentioned that I was overwhelmed by the beauty of the Alhambra, but if you imagine a whole city filled with these equally beautiful mosques and palaces and monuments, where the art is just everywhere. I had seen nothing like it before. And in those early days, I really loved exploring, just exploring the different mosques and taking photographs and going around the different monuments and enjoying the markets as well. So Istanbul has fantastic markets. So this is my teacher, Ayten Tiryaki, my illumination master. And I remember our first meeting. I came to meet her. She was at an art fair, and she had an exhibition there. And my Turkish friends, family friends, were translating and sort of explaining. My friend from the UK had told her that to expect me and that I would be coming, but my family friends were, translating and explaining who I was and that I'd like to try learning illumination. And I remember she had this book, which I have over here because I thought I'd show you, which is it's like one of the textbooks for new illuminators, and it's filled with motifs, basically. So
yeah, that's a really good book, yeah, for a start.
Yeah, the motifs that we have to learn. So she had this book, and she gave me some tracing paper, and I had my pencils, and she told me to start tracing over some of the motifs. And I was using my mechanical pencil. If you don't know what a mechanical pencil is, this is it, okay? And I was so nervous that every time she came over to look at my work, I cracked the nib of the pencil. I was just pressing too hard, so nervous. But she never said anything negative, or she would just say, "Mashallah, mashallah, mashallah, Aisha." So if you don't know what mashallah means, it's Arabic, and it means what God wills. And really, Muslims say it whenever something happens, but often we say it when we see something particularly beautiful. It's almost as though this beauty is through the will of God. And I know that my work was not beautiful. it was not beautiful at all. But what I gained from that is really about her adab, which means etiquette. Her manners and her kindness, that she wasn't going to embarrass me. She was just such a beautiful human being. And I think that was really my first inkling that illumination is not just about the beautification of sacred manuscripts, but it's really about nurturing the inner human qualities of the artist. And that's really why I think that story stood out for me. And I think that we're often attracted to Islamic art because of its external beauty, because the tile work is stunningly beautiful, because the palaces are wonderful, you know, and the books are just, they're just exquisite. But I think for those of us who decide to stay on that path and who sort of make it into part of your life, we stay on it, not just because of the beauty, but because of how it changes us and transforms us internally as well. And that first meeting with my teacher was my first inkling of that. So moving on, just to give you an idea of the atmosphere that we worked in, this is my teacher's studio, and this is the classroom. So you can see all of her students. I think these are the illumination students because they've got their pencils and their tracing paper and their papers spread all over the table. And normally Ayten Hoca, so Hoca, by the way, means teacher. It's a respectful term for teacher in Turkish, which is why I say Ayten Hoca a lot. She has her illumination students like one morning a week, they come for lessons, and then one morning a week she has her calligraphy students, because she's also a master calligrapher, which is very, very rare, but she's a master of both calligraphy and illumination. And then the rest of the time she works on her own commissions. So this is what the classroom looks like when the calligraphers are there. It's much quieter and they tend to all gather around her. There's only a couple of people there, but normally there are more, maybe 5 or 6 or so at a time. This is just a view of the workshop. So there is there are several rooms. She has a classroom where she does the teaching, but also there is a workshop where her husband prepares all of the paper for the calligraphers and illuminators in Istanbul, and all of the calligraphers and the illuminators know Ayten Tiryaki and her husband Özkan Bey. So he became, the way she told me the story is that when they were married, they wanted to take up a craft together. They wanted to do a hobby together. So they took up calligraphy. And she obviously excelled in the calligraphy, but it wasn't really her husband's thing. But he became very interested in the paper craft and the paper making and the preparing the papers. So he researched all the traditional methods of preparing Ottoman papers, and now he prepares the papers for the calligraphers and the illuminators in Istanbul. And this is Ayten Hoca's younger son, and he's just working on preparing the paper in the studio there. This is just a bit more of the shop and all of the wonderful equipment and materials you can buy, which are all specific to calligraphy and illumination. So you can see the reed pens, the qalam, the paints, there's also shell gold and various types of paper. And this is what the shop looks like. So this is the kind of environment that I was in. So now moving on to the process of learning illumination. So this goes back to some of my really early sketches. The process of learning illumination, you start first of all by tracing the motifs and then copying them and then drawing them from memory. So often people ask me when they look at illumination, they'll say, oh, you know, is there like a pattern book that you copy from? And they think that you just sort of copy patterns from some catalogue somewhere, but it's not like that at all. Before you even pick up a paintbrush, if you want to learn illumination, you first have to learn how to create the designs, and each design is created bespoke to the calligraphy. So this is me practicing the different line weights with the pencil. You'll see that some lines are thick and some are thin. And because they're my earliest attempts, they're really not very good. The leaves are all the wrong shape. But I thought it was important to show you that anyway. And I liken learning illumination is like learning a language, where it's like the lines are like the alphabet. You know, the different curves that you make with the pencil or with the paintbrush is like learning the alphabet. And then the motifs are like the vocabulary, so the different leaves and the different flowers, and also the roomy shapes. And there are many, many different categories of shapes and designs in Ottoman illumination. It's like learning the words or the vocabulary. And then after you've mastered that, you're allowed to put them into compositions. So we put those elements together to make one composition, one design. And those are like the sentences. And I feel like master illuminators are those of us who are writing Shakespeare. You know, they're writing poetry and they're writing beautiful prose. But most of us are just sort of writing competent sentences, you know, if we're not masters. But that's what I feel the process of learning illumination is like. So here are a few examples of me tracing and then copying and then drawing from memory. And if you look at the middle example, you may be able to see a few red pencil marks. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I'm just sort of highlighting a few.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, and also around here. So those are my teacher's corrections. So that's the way that we learn, that you do your lessons and then you show your teacher, and then he or she corrects it with a pencil. And on my first trip to Istanbul, I was doing this so much. I was literally drawing and painting for maybe 12, 14 hours a day. And because my teacher, Ayten Hoca, knew that my time was very short, so she pushed me very hard so that I could learn as much as possible in that short month. And really, it's as though the forms just become completely internalized. It's like they become a part of you. And I got to the point where I was dreaming of leaves and flowers. I'm not even joking. And I mean, I would close my eyes and all I would see were leaves and flowers everywhere. So it's very, very intense. And then once you've got the hang of the drawing and you're able to recreate these forms from memory, the next stage is to move from pencil practice to brush practice, just with the lines. So this is an example of one of my early brush practices. And what I'm trying to do here is control the line weights. So you'll see that they go from thin to thick, and it's just becoming very sensitive to the pressure of the brush. And just improving your sensitivity really is what the brush practice is about. And actually, if you've ever taken an illumination class with me, you'll recognize these sheets because I make all of my students do them as well. Okay, so this is the stage where you start learning about composition, which is very, very difficult, and it's not something that you can learn quickly. It literally takes years. And I mean, I've been doing illumination for 12 years, but I still send my compositions to my teacher sometimes, partly as a courtesy, but also because I just want to be sure that they're as good as they can be, you know? So on the left, we have what we call a plan. So we don't start by immediately drawing in flowers and leaves. We make a plan first with spirals and ovals and circular shapes, and they indicate where our flowers and leaves are going to go. And on the second from left image is where I've started putting in some flowers. This is probably my first composition, by the way, so it's not very good. And you can see the red marks that my teacher has put everywhere. And then this makes me laugh on the next image because she's clearly decided, Ayesha, this is so terrible, I'm going to have to go onto a whole other piece of tracing paper to make these corrections. And the whole thing is just red marks everywhere. And then I sort of superimposed my drawing and her corrections together, so you can see the difference between the two. So this was really in my very, very early days of illumination, but I had a lot of that, just working and then making corrections and making more corrections. And, you know, sometimes we go back and forth many, many times before the composition was okay. So it's a very, very slow process, and you need a lot of patience, or you will develop a lot of patience through it. This is an image of some of my Rumi work. So I mean, I didn't want everyone to think that illumination is all about flowers and leaves, because although the floral and leaf motifs are a big part of it, there are many, many forms, and I'm not going to go into everything here because that's a whole other lecture, but Rumi is an important form, and it's composed of stylized plant and animal motifs, but they're not recognizable as plants or animals. They're curved motifs. And there are also several different styles of Rumi, so maybe 6 or 7 different styles of Rumi, and many, many different styles of flower. There is also a category of design called Munhani, and one called Balut, which is clouds, and that comes from China. And there are also animal motifs as well, many animal motifs. So really, illuminators need to be proficient in all of these in their training. Okay, this is called Zengerik, which is the woven borders. I'll show you some of them in the illuminations a bit later in the talk, but I just wanted to show you another aspect of pattern that we have to learn. So on the left, we normally begin by learning the principles of Zengerik on graph paper. So these are 5mm squares. And we just use this for practicing the principle, which is, and the principle is, it's a woven border. This border has 2 strands that are sort of weaving in and out of each other. The one below is a bit more, has 3 strands, and it's a bit more like a braid, but not quite. And the one below that has 4 strands, and it's more complex, like a chain. So first of all, we use the squared paper to help us learn the principles. And then when we understand the principles, we start composing them on tracing paper. Now, in the first image, each strand is 5mm, but when you come to paint it in illumination, each strand is actually 2mm. So this strand, sorry, this one here, the circular one, is a 6mm border, just to give you some idea of scale. This is also a 6mm border, and this would be 8mm because there are 4 strands in this one. And then on the right, I have just some of I thought it would just be nice for you to see some of my brush practice. In fact, I have a few of my brushes with me. I just wanted you to be able to see the size of them. They're very, very small. And it's just sometimes I like to practice on a scrap of paper before working on the finished painting. So I keep these sheets, and also that you'll see that they have spirals on them, which is a kind of a warm-up for the brush practice. Illuminators and miniature painters both do that, and they make spirals going from outside to in, and then starting from the inside and going out. And it's also a kind of a meditation. It gets you into the right frame of mind before starting your work. So
sorry to interrupt you. Just to remind you, we have about 20 minutes left. I know you have slides.
Okay. So I'll try and go faster.
Okay.
So this is These are more complex patterns that and these are examples from later in my practice, a few years later, in fact. And actually, you can see that there are not so many red marks in this one, and some of them don't have any red marks at all. So I was improving. There is color on these ones because before you start painting, we generally plan out the colors first of all. So we use coloring pencils to indicate where the gold will go and where the blue background will go and what color the flowers will be. So these are some design ideas. And then these are some samples that I was testing with paint. So with illumination, you have many components to the border. You may have 3 or 4 different styles in one composition, and each element has to look harmonious and beautiful by itself, but it also has to harmonize with the rest of the composition. So that it's very important that everything looks good together, and we test it first to make sure of that. So this is me working on my first ever illumination back at the Princess School. Again, this is a work where there were a lot of mistakes, but it always makes me smile because I just remember how much I struggled with this and how and how much I learned from it as well. I mean, in this piece, the gold is not shining very well, and the brushwork is quite clumsy, and part of the border is too big for the small calligraphy. But the funny thing is, if you look at it, it sort of improves as I work my way around the composition. So it's really awful here, but then it gets better here and better here, and then by here it's not too bad. And there is a little chunk which is just fantastic, which is where my teacher has helped me. So it always makes me laugh looking at that. Actually, if I go back one, I'm working with the shell gold here, which is the most important material for illuminators, because the gold on the painting is what makes it illumination. The gold is what illuminates the painting and makes it shine. So this is just a little bit of how we make the gold, because illuminators have to learn to make their own gold paint. We take gold leaf, which is in the top left over here, and each leaf we grind with a drop of honey and some distilled water until it turns into a kind of a sediment like this. So a book of gold leaf has 24 leaves in it, and it may take a couple of hours to grind it all by hand. And then we pour clean water on top of the solution of golden water. And we just allow all of the impurities to rise to the surface, and the gold settles at the bottom. And we pour away the impurities and keep filtering it out until we're just left with the gold. And then the final stage is to sift the gold through a piece of silk, allow the water to evaporate off the surface, and you're left with a little cup of shell gold, which is called shell gold because it was traditionally made in shells. And then to use it, you just take a pinch of gelatin and distilled water and mix it into a paint.
I remember Ayten Hoca mentioning that the word pesib also relates to the word.
Yes, gold. That's true. Yes, yeah, because it comes from the Arabic tadhaba, which means gold, or which means to illuminate something, to gild something. That's right. So these are a few of my materials, and I have the shell gold here. This is an 18 karat shell gold, which is a bit more yellowy in color. We use 18, 22, 23, and 24 mostly, and they're all different colors of gold. The higher the carat, the more reddish the color. This one here is called moon gold, which is gold mixed with a little bit of palladium and silver. And it has a really beautiful silvery, sort of a pinky silvery color. Then next to that, I have indigo pigment and lapis pigment, which comes from the semi-precious stone lapis lazuli. I have my burnishes on the left, which are used for polishing the gold and for preparing the paper, so making the paper nice and smooth, and various brushes that I use for illumination. The big brush is for preparing paper, so spreading various preparations on the surface of the paper to make it smooth. The shell is also a type of burnisher for making the paper smooth. And then I have my mechanical pencil for detail drawing, a scalpel for scraping away mistakes, and a ruling pen, which is for drawing straight lines with the paint. And also there is the gold leaf and my gouache paints, because I tend to use a mixture of natural pigments and also commercial colors. So just to recap a little bit, I mean, what really kept me fascinated with illumination, like I said, I was attracted by the initial beauty, but I was very inspired by the people that I met and the qualities that I saw within them, and also how illumination reflects many aspects of the Islamic faith. Like the principle of unity, that everything in creation originates from a single divine source. And I feel that this is reflected in the illumination patterns, in that all of the patterns have a center point. Everything comes from originates from one point, and then spirals and grows from there. And everything is in complete harmony and proportion, or at least that's what we aim for. Also, illumination is a craft, and calligraphy as well, I'm sure, and many of the Islamic crafts of the Islamic world, they teach us about patience, because it takes a lifetime to learn these crafts. And it's never ending. And, you know, if you embark upon this path, I guarantee your patience will be tested and tested over and over again. I also think that they teach us about humility and surrender, because, you know, we start this path intending to master a craft, but it feels like often to really progress, the artist has to surrender to the discipline of the craft. So, you know, you're not actually the one doing the mastering, you're the one serving the craft, and just allowing the teacher to shape and mold you, and really follow their example as well. They're like a mentor. So, did you want to have a break for any questions, or would you like me to move on?
We have lots of questions, actually. But firstly, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really nice to listen to your journey, your background. And I think what really stood out from your presentation was you talking about your special relationship with your masters, your teachers, and showing all your materials as, and, you know, the process of making these artworks. I wanted to mention, actually, I think you were teaching also in the Yunus Emre Institute of London, right?
Yeah.
They have also some illumination courses for our listeners if they wonder where they can get courses. You know, Ayesha was teaching there also. We had a question about your relationship with your teachers. Simra was saying, I like the way that your various teachers have contributed to your character development and beautifying your character. How easy or difficult is it to continue such traditions when teaching ad hoc in the UK, for example?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's a bit difficult, because I mean, the UK is not Turkey, so it's a different culture, and you know, we have to be a bit adaptable, I think. You know, I think there are certain things which it might be a bit difficult for. You know, I can't always be as strict, maybe, as you know, as they might be in Istanbul, because the art is very much a part of their culture, and everybody kind of knows about illumination. And I think you know, sometimes I have to be a bit more lenient, because illumination is new to people in the UK, so I wouldn't want to scare them off, you know. So yeah, it can be a bit yeah, it's a challenge. And also, I don't have my teacher to refer to things all the time, because I don't live in the same country as her. So yeah, that can be quite difficult. But I think that maybe that is the challenge for us. I think it would be wonderful to have a group of English illuminators, you know, a community of English illuminators, and you know, and that we create a community like the community in Istanbul, but over here.
I mean, there's another point with that actually you didn't really rush getting your ijaza, right? It took you actually 10 years. It's a really
12 years. Yeah.
12. Oh, sorry, 12 years. Yeah. Ayesha, so there are some questions actually more like technical.
Yeah.
So they ask about your paints, water, oil, gouache. You actually mentioned you use gouache, but
gouache. So some of them are commercial gouache. Some of them are watercolors that I make from pigment, but the gold is made from real gold, and that's handmade as well.
And the shells you're using. So someone was asking, is it for a reason, or is it just because it's the tradition?
Well, I really like them, and also with the shells, I have some of them here. You can hold quite a lot of color in there, more than a palette. So if you're making a lot of paint, they're really good for storing a lot of paint in there. But I also just I like continuing the tradition, and I like that they're a natural material that feels nice with the brush. Yeah, so that's why I use them. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I won't continue, I guess, to ask questions, because I know you still have lots of slides to share with us.
I have a bit more.
Actually, we have about 10 minutes.
Okay, I have to go very fast then.
Yeah, I leave it to you now. Please go ahead. Thank you.
So the next section of my presentation is on the ijaza, and the ijaza is the apprenticeship that calligraphers and illuminators receive once they're proficient in the art. So this is me working at my studio at home on a piece of work called a hilya. And a hilya is an Ottoman composition where the calligraphy is a description of the moral and the physical characteristics of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And there is also some verses from the Quran as well. And it's deemed an honor to be able to make one. So this is me making my first one. And when calligraphers and illuminators receive their apprenticeship, they often make a hilya, which is something that shows both our commitment to the craft and also our love of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So this is me working on a practice one in preparation for the bigger one, which was my actual certificate. And this is just a bit more of my studio. And these are some of the works that I was working on up to the point of receiving my hilya. So The one on the left is the Hilya that I was working on. The middle one is a verse from the Quran, which is my parents' favorite verse, and it's a gift for them. It was a gift for them. It's in progress in this picture. And then the one on the right is another, again, it's a Quranic verse, which is in progress in that picture, but it's now on long-term loan to Dumfries House in Scotland.
Is the calligraphy piece by your master, Ayesha Gamiet?
The one on the left is. The one in the middle is by Nasser Mansour, who was a Jordanian calligrapher, and the one on the right is by Saba Abili, who is from Iraq. And then this is me working on my final Hilya. So this is the one which is my certificate, which authenticates my, which authenticates me as a fully fledged illuminator. So these are some images of the work in progress, and here you can see what it looks like with just the calligraphy. And this is generally how the illuminator receives the work, with just calligraphy on it. And then we create the designs bespoke to the calligraphy. So we'll choose different styles of illumination that suit that calligraphy. And it's quite a challenge because there are so many different components to the Hilya. There is the crescent around here, which is called a hilal. There is the circle around the crescent, which is called a shamsa, which is a stylized sun. And then there is the outer border here. There are these rectangles, and there is a large outer border on the green paper as well, which you have to consider. So this is just a short clip, I won't play it for too long, of just me painting a little bit of the border, just so that you can see how slow it is and how careful you have to be. And I'm trying to avoid the black lines on either side, which are also made with a brush. And you get some idea of the scale as well at which we're working. Okay, I'm going to move on. And then this is the finished Hilya. It's a bit difficult to photograph and see all of the details, so I just took a clip so that you could see some of the details more clearly. So you can see all of those elements that I was talking about before, the different levels of composition, the woven borders, the rumi and the flowers. You can kind of see how they all come together to create one whole composition, and how, you know, every element has to, we try to make it so that they're harmonized, even though we're working on many different styles and many different sizes of design and shapes as well.
I love the way you see, you know, you use colors and you can see the detail work in that.
Thank you. So this is just a little bit more detail of my Ijaza Hilya, some of the borders. And the central panel, which is the main panel. And then this is the full thing, just a photograph of it. So this is 12 years after my first trip to Istanbul, my Ijaza ceremony in 2018, April, I think. Yeah, and I waited a very long time for that. So you can see me in the center, and I'm next to my teacher, Ayten Tiryaki, who's on my left. And then in the front, the lady in the front with the white hair is my teacher's teacher, Çiçek Derman, who is really the authority on illumination. She's the author of this book, which is what all illuminators use when they start learning. And then to the left of her is her husband, who is a very renowned scholar of Islamic art. And then on her right is Hassan Hoja, who is a very distinguished calligrapher, probably one of the most famous calligraphers in the world. And he is also the teacher of my teacher. So it's a bit like a family tree that you see there of illumination, with you know, the grandparents at the front, and then Aytan Hoja, who's like the mother, and then the rest of us, most of the rest of us, are all people who received their ijaza on that day in either calligraphy or illumination. So we're like the children.
It's a lovely location to have your ijaza ceremony, actually.
It's fantastic. It's the grounds of the Suleymaniye Mosque. So it's actually the library complex, and we're in the courtyard of the library. And you can see the mosque in the background. It was stunningly beautiful. And then this is me receiving my ijaza. So it's like the student literally makes their own certificate, and then they're presented with it on the day. So this is the next part of my talk, a fully fledged illuminator, and the things that I've been doing since I received my ijaza. I think I should just carry on, Zainab, right?
Yes, I think the same. I mean, we received lots of positive comments and some questions, but I know this is the last part of your presentation. I would like you to finish it, of course.
Yeah, there's not, this is the last bit, so there's not too much more to go. So my first commission on receiving my ijaza was amazingly from the Royal Library at Windsor Castle. So a few years ago, the Queen had an exhibition of her Indian art, and a lot of it was book art, miniature paintings mostly, because the Queen has this incredible collection of Indian miniatures. And in commemoration of the event, they had commissioned a poet to compose poems in response to the exhibition, and the poet was Imtiaz Daka. And as a gift to the Queen and to Prince Charles, they commissioned 4 volumes of hand-bound poetry. So the poems were made into books, and there were only going to be 4 volumes made. And they commissioned me to illuminate the frontispieces to this poetry. So on this slide, you can see 2 of the designs that I did. In fact, these 2 are the same, but just with different colorways. And I understand that one of them went as a gift to the poet Imtiaz Daka, and the other one, excuse me, the other one was acquired by the Royal Collection to stay in the Royal Library. And this is the stamp that they put on the poetry, on the books of poetry. And then these are the other 2 volumes. The background design of the leaves and flowers is the same in each of them, but the one on the left has birds from Balmoral, and the one on the right has birds that are native to India. And I think the one with birds from Balmoral went to Prince Charles, and the one on the right with the Indian birds went to the Queen. So this is just, again, a little clip to show you what the illumination is like, because that particular technique, it's almost invisible in certain lights, but it's only when you move the page that you see things illuminating. So that's what would be happening as they're turning the pages of the book. And then these are just completed paintings, or some of them are in progress actually, that I finished either during my apprenticeship period or after. So yeah, I improved. And then next, I wanted to share with you some of my children's illustrations, because that's also another part of my practice. And you know, people often ask, you know, how did you become interested in children's books? But I've just always loved beautiful books, you know, whether they're illuminated or, you know, miniature paintings or as children's books. And this is some of the work that I've produced for my portfolio when I was looking for illustration work. I'm currently working on my second children's book. And both the first and the second book will be published in 2022. Unfortunately, I can't share any images from that because it's all under contract and I'm not allowed to talk about it at the moment. But watch this space, you know, just wait a bit longer. They're coming out soon. But I think even with the children's illustrations, you can see an element of illumination and miniature painting in them, I think, in the detail and the pattern and the use of gold. So here's another one. And this one here, which is a gift to a friend. And it was inspired by the Russian folk tale called the Firebird. One here, which is from the Arabian Nights, the Enchanted Horse. And then here, I have a few images of my fine art work. And earlier this year, I started working with a gallery. And so there is potentially a show in the future. And I'm working on a body of work with the gallery to exhibit. But I'm not sure what's going to happen with the coronavirus, so I can't give you any dates just yet. But again, there is a sort of a miniature. They're not strict miniature paintings or illuminations, but there is a miniature and illuminated element to these works. And this is the one that was at the beginning on the first slide, which is called One Song. And it's inspired by a poem by Rumi. And then the final part of my practice is my teaching work. So I've been teaching with the Prince's School for many years, both at their school in London, where we do short courses for the public on different aspects of traditional arts. And also there is an outreach program. So this is me with students in Cairo, in Egypt. And we're looking at design principles in Islamic art, and they use those principles to make things like tiles and plates. And they also use them in their architectural crafts as well, like gypsum. This is me with the students in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. And again, the project is kind of similar to the one in Cairo, where the students mostly focus on architectural crafts, and I teach them principles of Islamic design, but occasionally we do a little bit of illumination as well. And then this is with students in China. So that's a new project that the Prince's School has opened. And then this here is with students at the University of Cambridge, the Faculty of Education, because a few years ago I did a PGCE and I'm a qualified art teacher. And then I also did the Masters in Art, Creativity, Education and Culture. And after that, Professor Richard Hickman, who is in charge of the Art and Design Department, invited me to come back and teach and train some of the PGC art teachers. So I did that for a few years, and I would go for a few days every year to run workshops with the new art teachers in Islamic art, and we would work on how they could integrate Islamic art into the curriculum, which has been particularly fulfilling because there was nothing like that in the curriculum when I was younger. So it's really nice being able to use my skills to sort of bring that into the English art curriculum. And then finally, just to end, these are a few pictures of me with my teacher, Aytan Hoja, in England last year, where she came to give a workshop to students at the Prince's School. And you know, the relationship between the student and teacher doesn't end when you get your ijaza. I think it's really there for life. And it was very, very nice welcoming her, and just being able to share something of my life with her, because you know, every other time I had gone to visit her in Turkey, and I really enjoyed bringing her over, and the fact that she was working with the students at the Prince's School to give them a taste of what it's like to work with a real master. So this is her teaching one of her classes, and we can see our moderator Zainab right here helping in the background, who did excellent translation work. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks very much, Ayesha, for your presentation. I received lots of questions. I need to summarize it. I don't think we will be able to answer all of them. So there are some people, actually, a few of our listeners asked about what would you advise someone starting their journey in the field of illumination?
Oh, what would I advise? Well, find a teacher, find a good teacher, preferably someone with the ijaza, because the ijaza gives you a benchmark of the caliber of work, and you know, it also ensures that the work is that what you're learning is authentic. It's come from an authentic source, and that the person has a good foundation in the art. I would also advise them just to persevere and to be patient and to love it, because you can't do anything without loving it. And there will be times when you want to give up, because it's very, very difficult. But just keep going, and be patient with it.
Yeah, the process of learning is very time consuming.
Yeah, that's true. Very time consuming, and everything, it's very slow. It takes a long time to make a piece of work, and it takes a long time to develop the skills as well. So be patient with yourself, and listen to your teacher. Don't argue with them, because they, you know, whatever they're doing, because they will be endlessly correcting your work. And you will find it frustrating. You will find it frustrating and you'll want to quit. But you've got to remember that everything they're doing is to make you better, which is, you know, something I had to realize very early on as well. You know, all of the marks, all of these red marks, you know, when my page is filled with red marks, it's a sign that your teacher is taking you seriously and they want you to get better, because they've invested their time. That means those red marks means that they've invested their time in you.
So. As you also mentioned, your relationship with your master also helps you move forward in your spiritual journey also.
Yeah, I think that's right, because your teacher is a kind of mentor for both your character. Sorry?
So how did you communicate with your master? Did you learn Turkish?
Oh yeah. Well, I tried, but I don't speak Turkish. I tried a few times. I tried learning in the UK, but because I traveled so much, so many times throughout the year, I kept having to quit courses, because you know, I traveled for work. I made several work trips throughout the year, so it was very difficult to commit to a course. And then I once told my teacher that I'd like to take a Turkish course in Istanbul, and she said no. She said, no, you're not doing that, Ayesha, because you need to focus on your illumination. And if you start learning Turkish, that's going to take your attention somewhere else. So I had to listen to her, but I would love to learn Turkish and become fluent in it. I don't speak Turkish, but my teacher speaks a little bit of English, and some of her students speak English quite fluently, so that they could help in translation, but also because it was a craft, it was mostly me watching and copying. And I didn't need to have, it wasn't essential to have language, although it would have made things a lot easier, especially in the beginning.
Thank you for that. So, is it important to have an ijaza to teach in the field of illumination, just like calligraphy?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. I mean, I did some teaching before I got the Ijaza, but it was at a very elementary level. It was just workshops, and I had my teacher's permission to do that. I asked her if it would be okay, if she would mind me doing that, and she was fine with it, because it was at such a basic level. But I think if you're going to teach in depth, you should be. It's good to have an ijaza, or it's good at least to be working towards it, I would say, because what the ijaza does, one of the reasons why it's important is that it maintains the quality of the craft throughout the generations. And if you don't have it, you may be making fundamental mistakes and then passing on bad practice, which weakens the craft. So yeah, for the, and you know, it just you know, someone who has an ijaza, it means that they're committed to it. It's not like this is just a hobby for them, or you know, it's you know, there's a level of commitment there. So I do think that's important.
Thank you, Ayesha. It is 7:15. So I think I won't be able to forward all our listeners' questions to you. But thanks for your presentation. It was really lovely to listen to you, and I'm sure our listeners must have understood what I meant with a very special personality.
Thank you, Zainab. That's really kind. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. And thank you everyone who has tuned in. I really hope you enjoyed it, and sorry that I went on so long.